Hi, and welcome back to my second development log for Toast Engine. It's been about 2.5 months since the last update, and I have now completed what I call the next sprint. I will show you in this video all the changes that has been made to Toast Engine, and also talk a bit about what the next steps will be. So, the main target for this version of Toast Engine were to enable the user to add more details to the terrain. As you can see from this screenshot, there isn't much of a terrain to talk about. It's very boring. It looks very bland. And the first step for me to do that is to add what I call medium terrain details. And I decided that the user is going to be able to choose a noise. So in this case, a Perlin noise, and then put that on top of the height map. The user will also be able to choose at what subdivision level of the planet terrain that this will start to happen, because there's no point in putting details on the terrain on the horizon. Like the user wants never see that. So that can be removed. And so there's a limit, a set subdivision where this starts to add medium details to the terrain. In the future, like right now, it's just one noise for the whole terrain. But for the future, I'm going to add biomes. So for example, certain biomes might use a noise that creates sand dunes, and another one that creates a lot of rockier terrains and such. For example, craters is going to have its own biomes in the future. So the way we do this is we click on the Mars entity over here, press add component, and then we go to planet specific, and we go to terrain details like that. And now we have a number of options down here. So here's the subdivision I talked about earlier, where you can choose which subdivision you would like the terrain details to start appearing. And the subdivision is based on the distance to the camera. We set maybe 4 octaves here, frequency maybe 3. Now we also need to increase the number of subdivisions here. I forgot about that. So put that to 7, and then amplitude. And now we can see things starting to happen. And let's put it to maybe around 60, something like that. And now we can see, if we zoom out a bit here, we can move the camera frustum as well. You can see now we've added a bit of a detail here to what we used to have before. To be able to achieve this, I had to do a lot of rework on the planet system. So previously, in the planet system, basically I created an icosphere, and then during runtime I subdivided that a number of times. In the case of the last video, I had 9 subdivisions made. And that would have looked something like this. We can turn off atmosphere, show the grid, and to wireframe, and we pull this down. This is how it looks in the last video. And you can see that each triangle of the terrain is huge. We have the starships over here. Looks really small compared to the triangles, but they are actually 50 meters tall. So the triangles here they are huge, right? So it's hard to add terrain details with that in mind. So what I first did was, instead of having a base icosphere that wasn't subdivided at all, and then I subdivided 9 times during runtime, I got that down to 200 milliseconds approximately. I now do a base icosphere, which at the start of the scene, I subdivided 7 times at startup. And then I put every triangle from that base planet basically into a node system. And then during runtime, I go through the node system and I pick out what nodes will be within the camera frustum. So if you see, I add back the camera frustum and I zoom out a bit, you can see that far from everything is being rendered. It's only the things that the players can see that is being rendered. From those nodes that I get, I subdivide them an additional 7 times. So that leads me to having 14 subdivisions. So if we remove the camera frustum and we can go up to 7 here, you can see that the number of the details goes up a lot. And the detail is of course closer to the camera. And you can see that here, if we go back to normal, you can see here is where we added the terrain, basically, the medium terrain details. So now I have 7 plus 7 in the base plan, so I have 14 subdivisions. In the future, I will most likely have to go even further up to get more detail. You can see I can go up to 11, even 12. But then it starts taking time for the system to create the actual terrain. So that is something I will have to make even more efficient in the future. You can see the level of details areas here are a bit smaller. Maybe that could be changed, optimize how it's created. But and this is with 19 subdivision, 12 plus 7. So we go back to 7 here. What we have now, so we have 14 subdivisions now. That's a good enough for now. I will have to work even more on this. I can do this now with 14 subdivisions in 200 milliseconds, which is done on a second thread when I rebuild the engine. So yeah, I'm really happy with that for now. We can go back to normal and add the atmosphere back on. Okay, the second part I would like to, that I was planning to add and I actually added, was terrain objects. So by using instance rendering, I could have one object being rendered multiple times across the surface to add some more details. And we do that by going to the Mars entity and then add component, go to terrain objects. We can set a maximum of 1000 here. Then we choose the model which I've created in Blender, simple stone. We set that we wanted to start at 9 subdivisions as well as the last one. And let's go for 4 per face. And now we can see here that we have stones on the surface. They all have a bit random size and a random rotation to make them look a bit different from each other. I'm going to add even more different kind of rocks as well, even adding a color variation on it to make them look even more unique. But yeah, as you can see, it looks really cool. And if we change the sun to sunset here, drag this down a bit, you can see that it looks really good. So I'm kind of happy with that. Really happy. Another issue I run into while doing this, if we go back to the Mars entity, turn off atmosphere, and then go to wireframe mode. With this number of triangles, I had to rebuild the physics system. So the physics system, which I worked on in the last video, didn't really. It worked well with triangles being like this big, for example. You pick one triangle and just do collision testing with that triangle. But now I had to divide the terrain into chunks, and each chunks contain a number of triangles. So in the broad face, I check the object against the chunk's limits, the bounds of the chunk. And if the object is within that chunk, then I go into the more detailed narrow phase where I do a separating axis theorem on each triangle. So that way, the terrain is now much more scalable. I think I need to go through this several more times in the future, maybe optimize how the chunks works and so on. But I think it works for now, and I mean, I'm not gonna spend several months just trying to get it perfectly. I will iterate over it again and get back to it. And if you turn back the atmosphere now, and we see how the collision detection works now. This is Martian sunset. What you see here now is that the rotation of the box collider just keeps rotating. There's no friction here that slows it down, and there is no what's it called? Nothing that there's no air resistance on it acting on it, so it just keeps spinning forever. But as you can see, I mean, it works better than it did before. I also implemented fixed time steps, so that will also increase the realism of the physics simulation. Otherwise the frames per seconds of the game engine would affect how the physics works. So if it's lagging, then it will bounce more, for example. With a fixed time step, it works a bit more, what's it called? time independent of time. So yeah, that's really good. And now for what I'm going to add in the next release. Let's put the sun back here on the top, make it a bit more clearer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the interface over here, the UI. Currently, it looks a bit plain and boring as it does in the, like the train did in the last release. So what I'm doing is I'm implementing a 9-patch system, which basically is that I can use one texture for all of the UIs and get a border around it and so on. And then no matter the scale or size of the panel, it will work with that texture. So also a lot easier to work with with resolutions and with different UI scales in the future. I'm also going to add a gradient to it to make it look a little bit more alive than it does today. We also have it, I'm also going to add that when you right click one of the starships here, it's going to get a pop-up which shows the altitude above the surface. So that's something I'm going to add. I'm also going to look at the PBR shader, or the physically based rendering shader that I have right now, with the pipeline for that. If we go here and turn off the atmosphere, you can see that we have a skybox here, and the skybox is the irradiance texture used during rendering to give light to this, but we have the atmospheric scattering. So during the day, that should have an effect on these ones. But right now, they don't have. So if you turn this off, you see there's no difference to the starship. There should be a difference here depending on if it's day or night. Also, the sun is currently rendered on the skybox, should be on the atmospheric scattering. While we're at it, we can look at this image. This is on the left here, you can see my sun, and on the right, you can see a real image of the sun at sunset at Mars in real life. So you can see there's some size difference there that needs to be addressed. But yeah, this here is, I need a way to combine the skybox together with the atmospheric scattering to have an effect on the starships here. I'm also gonna, these ones are now approximately 60,000 vertices, and that's way too much. You can see I even have details inside the engine bay here, which should be normal mapped and not like this. So I'm gonna learn how to do normal mapping and ambient occlusion baking and normal baking inside Blender, and also lower the resolution. Also going to try to add some kind of texture to the heat shield to make it look a little bit more alive. But if we scroll out like this is still 60,000 vertices being rendered. Doesn't need to be like that. Here we could, over here we could use like 10 vertices that we would get the same view. So I'm gonna add level of details to the meshes here and do something like Unity has, where you can drag and at what level of distance you would like it to change over to a different detail level, so to say. And then also we have the terrain over here, and it's if you go down to the sunset again, we can see that even clearer that this is now flat shaded. Basically, each face has its own normal. I would like to add options to put it into smooth shading so that each vertices has its own normal, which depends on which face is part of that vertex or vertex. I'm planning to add it here into the settings so I can check which one is best. Right now, I'm happy with how it looks, but I think maybe smooth might look even better going forward when we add even more details. So I plan to do that. Other than that, there's for sure going to be some bug fixes here and there, and also some improvements for sure. But yeah, other than that, I'm happy. You can see also here that if we go to the Mars entity, turn it off and go to wireframe, we can see that it's actually rendering around the camera over here. It's also behind the camera, and that's because when the camera turns, it gives the rebuilding of the planet a bit of a break. Otherwise, it would have to be super quick. But now when it turns, it actually has like a buffer. So that's actually turned out really well. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you in a future video in a few months again. Thanks and goodbye.